Chloe here from World Have Your Say. Thanks for downloading our podcast. Now, we spent the hour reflecting your conversations about the Charleston shooting. We began by speaking to two former white supremacists. Then, about 35 minutes in, we had a conversation responding to President Obama's comments about gun controls and the facts he says other advanced countries don't have these mass shootings. And something that wasn't on the radio programme, but an extra for you here on the podcast. A week on from the floods in Tbilisi in Georgia, which killed 18 people, you can hear the voices of some of the people affected by the floods. For our terms of use, please head to bbc.co.uk/terms. Enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to World Have Your Say. Chloe Tilley here with you. Now, we're still focusing on the conversations surrounding the shootings in Charleston yesterday at that African-American church. As you heard there in the news, in the last few minutes, Dylan Roof has been charged with 9 counts of murder. It's also being reported that he's confessed. What we do know is that police say this was a hate crime. And there's several strands being discussed on social media. One highlighted by comments made by the flatmate of Dylan Roof. He said Dylan was big into segregation. He also said he'd been planning something like this for 6 months. Many people now asking, why was this not reported? Does it mean that these kind of views are widely held? We'll get into that discussion. Also, in South Carolina, there are statues of white supremacists like Tillman Hall outside the State House in Columbia, roads named after them. There's conversation being had about whether the US has a problem with white supremacy groups. We'll also pick up on President Obama's comments that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries, tapping in, of course, to the gun control debate. Plus, those amazing comments from the son of one of the victims of this shooting saying that he has already forgiven the gunman. He made those comments less than 24 hours after his mother was shot dead. But for the first half of the programme, I want to introduce you to two men who used to be involved with white supremacist groups. They're now reformed and they want to share their stories with you listening all around the world about why they got involved and why they changed their minds and realised that this was not the way they wanted to live their lives. If you've got any questions for them, get in touch via Twitter. You can use the hashtag WHYS, and of course I'll put them to Chris and Scott, who are with us for the next half an hour. Scott is in Memphis, Tennessee. He's a funeral director there. And Chris is in Michigan and was involved in a white supremacist group between the year 2000 and 2011. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us.
Yes, ma'am. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris,
thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Chris, I want to begin with you first of all. Just tell people listening all around the world how it was that you got involved in this group and what was this group all about?
It was a process, I guess you could call it. As I was growing up, my grandfather promoted racial ideology. Excuse me. In April of 2000, my wife and I, we lost our very first daughter. She passed away in my arms. And myself, I got lost in emotions of anger and hatred and jealousy and resentment, because my focus was, why are all these other people having children and we can't? It was a bunch of emotions I just didn't know how to deal with. And eventually, whispers from the shadows of online internet, you end up meeting people who try to relate to your own problems and present this family ideology. And that was what happened with me. Once the family ideology there was a connection made, then came of how to try and relate that problem to race. But by then, you're already brainwashed.
How long did that process take?
Let's see, my daughter passed away in April of 2000, and I think I met somebody probably about a month later, and we were, I guess for lack of a better term, sucked in not too long after that, and it went on for 11 years.
And tell me what it was like in the group, the sort of things you did, the sort of views that were openly discussed.
Definitely racial segregation. anybody who was not white or of non-Caucasus ethnicity was deemed as an enemy. Jews, African Americans, Muslims, what have you, they were all deemed as subhuman, and the discussion was we were supposed to hate them while in turn building family foundations with our white brothers and sisters.
So the idea being this indoctrination, this sucking in, as you call it, that you were being told that all of the problems that were being faced by white people were the faults of other ethnicities.
Exactly.
Did you have any friends or association work colleagues with anybody who wasn't white at that period? Did you have any experiences that you could draw on that made you question what you were being told during this time?
Well, before I got involved, I had numerous friends who were of different ethnicities, and once I became quote unquote like-minded like these other individuals, on the back burner, I still had people that I worked with that I would, talk about daily things with, but outside of work, that was considered a no-no. You didn't talk to anybody that was non-white. And the relationships that I had with these people at work were good. They were open, they were honest, but it was, you were not to have anybody of non-white ethnicity at your house or in your yard or for a gathering or anything like that. It was completely looked down on.
So these people, these work colleagues, people of other ethnicities, were they aware that you were a member of this group? Did this group have a name? Was it obvious that you were linked to them?
At the beginning, they knew I was a quote-unquote skinhead. I had the swastikas on my locker. So, yeah, it was very prevalent, my ideologies. As it progressed, the people that I worked with and the people that I interacted with, they knew, but they only knew what I allowed them to know.
And tell me, I understand you've got a number of tattoos on your body.
Yes, I have 42 total.
Whoa, and give us a flavour of them.
Well, not all of them are racial in nature, and some of them have been removed through laser removal. I used to have pure hate tattooed across my knuckles. I had 1488 tattooed down my hand, 14 symbolizing the 14 words, and 88 is the 8 is the eighth letter of the alphabet. I'm sorry. H is the eighth letter of the alphabet, and when you put them together, it stands for Heil Hitler. I had a wolf's hook tattooed on my forearm. I've got swastikas on my upper arms, swastikas on my chest and my stomach. I've got a clover, a four-leaf clover on the side of my neck with a swastika in it. I have 2 swastikas tattooed on the inside of my mouth. Those are the racial ones.
Wow. And how does that affect your life now? I mean, we'll talk in a moment about sort of what you were involved in when you were a member of this group back in, you left in 2011. But I can't let that go with all those visual images of a view you once held but you no longer hold. How does that affect you now? In life, in jobs, in meeting people?
Yeah, it's really tough right now because I just graduated from college this month, and trying to find a job in the field that I want to be in is really tough. With Ferguson and Baltimore and now Charleston, trying to get on the police department and work in gang task force because I have that personal knowledge of how they operate is extremely hard. They won't even let me in the door because I'm considered a liable individual for racial discrimination.
So, Chris, for people listening around the world, give us a sense of the things that you did when you were a member of this white supremacist group.
Well, unlike most that you hear about on the media, the group that I was in wasn't violent. There was no aggressiveness towards any other ethnicities. We instead developed plans to put skinheads in a positive light. We did baby baskets for families that couldn't afford the stuff they needed for a newborn child, and we gave it to them. We put hygiene packages together and gave them to homeless people. We did Christmas projects where we would buy Christmas toys and ship them all around the U.S. to white children whose parents were either unemployed or couldn't afford Christmas for the children. So our focus wasn't on violence. It was more focused on putting race in a positive light.
Chris, let me introduce you to Scott, who's listened to every word you've said. Scott was also involved in a white supremacist group. Scott, I'm interested to know, listening to that, is it similar to your experiences and how you got involved in the movement?
Well, sure, of course, listening to Chris, and by the way, nice talking to you, Chris. I can tell that, of course, I'm somewhat, there's an age difference between myself and Chris by the years that he used, of course, 2000, and then he just graduated from college. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, Indianola, Mississippi, which is also the home of B.B. King, the famous blues singer. And I grew up at a time, where there was a hotbed of racial tension going on. You can imagine back in the 60s, when all the integration and the marches and things like that. And I grew up in a society where the atmosphere of racism was there. Unlike Chris, though, I was not taught racism by my parents, my mother or my dad. They just didn't have any racial or racist views whatsoever. We employed a black lady who was actually turned out to be a godmother to myself and other brothers and sisters. But I came from a broken home, and of course, I think this is kind of similar to Chris in a way. He could maybe not broken home, but I think he said he became disillusioned and was unhappy. And this is pretty much a common denominator. I was an unhappy child. I came from a broken home. I had an alcoholic father. And there was just so much that that was going on at the time that affected myself. I was an unhappy child, and then I was looking for a place to fit in. And at the time, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups were very prevalent in the area that I was living. And as Chris stated, I was sucked in to that by listening to their rhetoric and the activities that they had going on at the time, and it gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of family. I didn't have a family whatsoever at the time because of the broken home, and they gave me a family and a sense of belonging and importance. So I also was, sucked right into this movement and grew from there.
There's people getting in touch with us from all around the world who are listening to Chris and Scott sharing their stories about why they joined a white supremacist group. Both of them have since turned their back on the movement. Of course, we're talking about this because of the shooting in Charleston in South Carolina on Wednesday night. Those 9 African Americans who were shot dead in church. We're being told by the police this is a hate crime. Information coming out about Dylan Roof, the 21-year-old man who has since been charged with 9 counts of murder, saying that he had views along the lines of white supremacists. And it's a big conversation online about whether the United States has a problem with white supremacist groups. Rad Rich on Twitter says, don't just make this an American problem. There's the National Front in Great Britain, far right in France and other parts of Europe, Germany as well. Come on. Well, that's true, Rich. But of course, the reason we're talking about this is because somebody who holds those views in the US has seemingly shot dead 9 people in a church. And this is the conversation which is being had online, and we're purely reflecting that conversation. And Boko, listening in Nairobi in Kenya, has this question for both of you. What is it that makes them hate or dislike black people? I don't get it. Doesn't it matter that we're all humans? Just try and explain to people, Chris, maybe you could. how it is you can get so sucked in that you can think an entire group of people should be hated.
When you ask a question, why is it that people hate black people or people hate Jewish people or Muslims? It's because when you're brought in, your whole focus is white. Everything that is white is considered good unless it's intermixing with something that's non-white. Every single hour of the day, it is pushed on you that white is better than everything else. And you begin to believe that. And so anybody that's non-white is seen as a threat, is seen as a subhuman. And because of the ideologies that you've been exposed to, you actually believe this rhetoric and this propaganda that they push on you.
Chris, how did you get out?
We had just finished doing a Christmas project helping children. My wife and I, we put $1,400 into buying gifts for children all around the U.S. Of course, they were white children. And the group that I was in, the commanding officer above me made a comment about, okay, now this is done, you guys can get active. And the sad part was we were the only ones that were active. We were the only ones coming up with projects. We were the only ones doing anything. And when he said that, I got really offended. And I said, you know what? I have to back off and let the funds regenerate from my work so we can help more people. And he said, no, you need to be active. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to take some time and spend some time with my family, let things build back up, and then we can progress from there. He goes, I think you spend enough time with your family. You need to get back out and get active. And when somebody attacks my family like that to my face, it makes me angry. And so
you took a step back effectively. You thought, well, you know, I'm gonna move away from this, and it was almost that rather than any defining moment that made you go, well, hang on, why do I hate people of other ethnicities? It was almost a row over money that made you see the error of your ways.
Well, that's the clarity of it. I realized that as long as you have money that you're feeding into their cause, they will put you on a pedestal and make you look like the best thing for the white supremacist movement. But as soon as you don't have the money or it runs out, they will just kick you out, kick you to the curb. I mean, we were labeled as race traitors and FBI informants. I don't care. Give me a label. I don't care. I'm not in no more. And that.
I think they did. I think and excuse me if interrupting. I think pretty much Chris hit on something that's really important. Of course, you know, these organizations that give you a sense of family to suck you into these organizations, and then they, of course, with Chris, they harped on, you know, where you spend too much time with your family, I guess, personal family, and it's time for him to get active. So now they want him to get out there and get active and abandon his, you know, his real family. And I think they kind of used the same tactic, and then it kind of backfired on them then. That's pretty much a common denominator of them giving you a place of importance and a family of your own, and makes you feel like you're part of a bigger family. And that is a common denominator that they have.
I wonder, Chris, how you said that you've got children. Were your children born? Were you passing on this view, this white supremacist view to your children? I just wonder, when you then moved out of the movement, how you kind of reversed that. That must have been quite challenging.
Excuse me. My children were born while we were in, and they absorbed the racial indifference that I had, and they began to present it. My daughter would make comments in the stores, and that was very disconcerting for me because, yes, I wanted them to be racially aware at that time, but I didn't want them to promote it because I knew what kind of dangers they could face if they did. So when we got out, it's just like a mainstream media, I changed before I got out. I changed my beliefs, which is what made me get out. And then after that, I found Jesus. I've been baptized, and my children, while they understand what it was I was doing and why I did it, they have taken to Christianity and acceptance of everybody a lot faster than the racial hatred. They've let that go completely. My children play with all ethnicities of children.
Chloe, our children play a big part, a big part of, probably our change. I know with myself, mine did. I got a daughter that's 30-something years old now. I've got a son that's 28 years old, and at the time, my son was going through the age where he was very impressionable, and some of the activities that I was doing was rubbing off on my son, and I saw this, and of course, that played a big part in me leaving the organization, and then, of course, with my daughter, my relationships with my family were just destroyed because, they didn't agree with the things that I was doing. And my daughter, of course, got married, and I was not invited to her wedding. She had a child, her first child. I was not even aware that she was pregnant. So, I think that's another thing that kind of works on people like Chris and myself when we're in this organization stuff. When we come to the awareness and the awakening that we're losing our family, and it does have an impact on your decision to leave these organizations.
Scott, have you been able to rebuild that relationship with your daughter?
Oh, sure. It was a process of rebuilding. Even with my sister, I went 10 years without seeing my sister or speaking a word to her, and just fate. The loss of an older sister to breast cancer brought my sister and I back together. And yes, it took some effort, a lot of effort, and a lot of tears, and a lot of hardening, just stomach tightening up and like that of losing your family. And I was able to rebuild with my daughter, and of course I was also able to steer my son out and away from the racist movement and the racist ideas that he was starting to pick up because of myself.
Well, Chris and Scott, do stay with us. So we're going to take a quick news break, but then I want to get your perspective on the events in Charleston straight after the news. Lots of you have been getting in touch with us on Twitter. Stanley in Kenya on Twitter says, do the white supremacists hate out of fear or a past injustice that's happened to them? How can you just hate a whole community? We'll get into that after the news. We'll also be talking a little bit about gun control after President Obama's comments there. Do stay with us. Plenty more to come here on World Have Your Say. Hello, welcome back to World Have Your Say. Chloe Tilley here, live with you for the next 30 minutes. We're going to continue our conversation surrounding all of the issues which have come up after that shooting in Charleston. 9 people, 9 African Americans shot dead in a church on Wednesday evening. Lots of threads of conversation on social media that we'll pull together over the next 30 minutes. We're going to continue talking to our former white supremacists in the next couple of minutes. We'll also talk about gun control after those comments by President Obama saying that it was in the realms of the US people to start looking at gun control and talking again about whether they have the right attitude to gun control. We'll also talk a little bit about forgiveness if we have time, after the son of one of the people who were killed in that attack on Wednesday night said less than 24 hours after his mother had been shot dead, I forgive the gunman. Lots of comments coming in on Twitter. Ashley says the Confederate flag should be taken down for good in the US. What purpose does it serve but to remind people of the hate that it represents? Steve in Virginia also tweeting using the hashtag WHYS said, "I'd like to show the show to address that it's not just whites that are racist, they come in all colours." And Barry has tweeted a question to Chris, who's in Michigan, who was involved in a white supremacist group between the year 2000 and 2011, and also to Scott, who's in Memphis, Tennessee, who's now a funeral director. Barry says, "Would love to hear what these two men have done since to justify them being reformed." Chris, do you want to answer that first?
I went to college. I'm 41 years old, and I just graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. My hope was to one day get on the police department and then work in gang task force, since I have an inside knowledge of how they work. And I'd like to address that tweet or that comment about, yes, there are hate groups in every ethnicity, not just whites. I think it is something that is learned or something that is taught, and it doesn't have a color to it. This race performs an act to this race that's hateful, and somewhere in there, pride gets in the way, and people want to teach their children, grow up and don't take that. And that's a good thing, not to take somebody demeaning you, but to teach them to hate somebody else because of their color of their skin, that's wrong.
Scott, respond to that tweet about what you've done to reform, as it was put in that tweet, since you've left this white supremacy group.
Well, sure. I basically, of course, I left the organizations probably so many years, probably more so than what Chris was in, because of the age difference. I'm 56 years old, got a degree in mortuary science. Of course, I questioned at one time, of course, over the period of time, I questioned, do I really believe the things that I am doing or preaching, within these organizations? And of course, I did not, harp or concentrate on those thoughts very much, because I just went on with my racist life. But certain incidents in life happened. I was at a restaurant. I pulled over from a restaurant after leaving the restaurant, and I'd been drinking. And of course, I failed a sobriety test, and also found a loaded weapon underneath the floorboard of my car. This threw me into the court system, and when it threw me into the court system, I said, well, I'm going to pull one of those strict in the book. I'm going to go to an alcohol and drug treatment center for 30 days, come out, have my charges dismissed, and then go on my racist life. And then, of course, I went in one person and came out another. I was faced and forced to sit down with counselors, talk to them, meet other people of different races and religions, and have intimate conversations with them, and got to know these people. And that was where the seed was planted. It took me a while to actually grasp, a couple of years to grasp what took place within that treatment center, but it did. And I remained silent for a number of years. And then I mentioned I had a sister with breast cancer. And, of course, on her deathbed, I was, was there talking to her, and she always asked me, she said, have you ever thought about taking your story and trying to help other people? And I said, yeah, I thought about it, but I just, I don't know how I'll be accepted, anything like that. Then 2010 came, and I had to have some surgery myself and almost died. And I said, I don't want to leave this world and people think of me as the person I was, years ago. And then I went and basically just, made a public announcement. Yes, a lot of people already knew it. I said, yes, this is me, and this is what I did. And so I've gone and been going around the country and working with people like Daryl Davis, a black musician, and working with a gentleman called the G-Man out of New York City, Gary, who has a kind of a radio broadcast of his own, and trying to get the message out, going around the different schools and talking with these kids and sharing my story and hoping I can prevent them from making the same mistakes that I did.
And Scott, when you talk to those school kids, do you often hear things that worry you? I mean, one of the many conversations on social media at the moment is how widespread are these white supremacist views within the United States? When we hear that Dylan Roof's flatmate is saying, yes, he wanted segregation, yes, he said he was going to commit some big act, but we didn't really think it was going to happen. People seem astounded that he didn't think to go to the police. Is it because these views are widely held? What are the sort of things that you hear when you go into these schools and talk to these kids?
I basically hear some of the same stories that, I've told you, regarding myself, and I think Chris did also. A lot of these kids are troubled kids, and some of their parents just do have racial views. Yes, I think widespread in the United States, there's a lot of racial animosity going on. Your racial views being held. These people may not be speaking out as loudly as some of us did when we were going through that process and practicing these beliefs. But yes, you got the organized white supremacist group, and then you got these lone wolves that basically is what the gentleman in South Carolina was. Of course. I'm not sure if he was acting on behalf of another organization. It doesn't seem that way, but it doesn't.
I mean, it's difficult to know, isn't it, what happened in South Carolina? We do know that one man has been charged with 9 murders. It's difficult to know at this stage until the criminal process has gone through. I want to bring Chris back in as well. Chris, I want to get your reaction. I've had a question which has come in as well, which I want to put to you in a moment from Nairobi. But while Scott has raised this issue of lots of people coming from broken homes, growing up with these racist views within the family, and then they articulate them and they live them, and there is a problem of white supremacy in the US, as Scott has just said. Do you agree with that, Chris, particularly when you look at what's just happened in South Carolina?
Yes, I was going to reiterate back on that when Scott said he came from a broken home. He didn't know what I came from. My home was broken as well, and I think that's a common thing with white supremacists or a lot of racial individuals. Is my father was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic. He beat me and my mother. He tried to kill her in front of me. When she divorced him and we moved on, my stepfather came into the picture, and he didn't really give me any attention because he had a daughter. So I became a shadow. I became suicidal. And, it was one of those things where I didn't have anybody to identify with. And these individuals, these white supremacists, these racists, they give you somebody you can identify with. That's how they bring you in. And just like Dylan, I saw a news story earlier. He said, quote unquote, he was going to start a race war. And among the white supremacists, that's a big thing. It's called RAHOWA. It's spelled RAHOWA, Racial Holy War.
Chris, when you look back at what you did, sorry, Scott, before I just want to ask while you're speaking, Chris, and then Scott, by all means, come in. Do you look back at your 11 years in this group and feel ashamed?
I don't know if I feel ashamed because I made it out. I could tell other people about it. I can warn the younger generations of what to expect. I made it out alive. I made it out without any criminal charges. I've never been arrested. So I made it out to a point where I can use it as a positive. I am ashamed of the way that, or of the feelings that I had towards others, because it wasn't their issue. It was mine, and it was mine because I didn't know how to deal with it. I lost my daughter. That was what drew me. That was what sent me spiraling. And then that's what allowed them to put their talons in me, if you'd like to say it like that.
Scott, I want to ask you one question before we let you go. Agnes has tweeted this from Nairobi. What does white supremacy depend on to thrive? Black people, or interesting, like you were talking before, is it to do with a lack of integration?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. I couldn't hear.
That's right, Scott. So Agnes has tweeted from Nairobi saying, what does white supremacy depend on to thrive? Is it just the existence of black people? Or, as you were talking about before, is it to do with a lack of integration?
Well, I don't know if it's a lack of integration or a lack. I think basically what they need to drive and survive with is the idea that a lot of people just are not educated on white supremacy. As long as you have people taking and believing the rhetoric that they are preaching, and you get these troubled kids that are going around the country that are picking up on this information, it's the younger people that they have to survive and to keep going, because those are the targets that they have. And of course, I basically, I wanted to say this earlier. You're talking about organized racial groups and stuff, and these lone wolves, just like Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was one person. It doesn't take but one person to really make a catastrophe in this country that would catastrophic event that kills a lot of people, and that's what happened in South Carolina.
Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story from Memphis, Tennessee, and to Chris, who's in Michigan. Both of them formerly involved in white supremacist groups, now turn their back on that, and Scott's going out talking to kids in schools. We've heard that Chris has got an education. He's hoping to work with the police and use some of his knowledge to help tackle this. We're grateful to both of you for joining us on World Have Your Say. In a moment, we're going to talk about President Obama.